Well, we're getting ready to get our meeting started. We're going to start working on background music. I think that'll be the next technology edition, maybe some elevator music in these moments just before the meeting starts.
All right, we're right straight up at noon. Trying to see if Kelly's called back in yet. I think she is. We got a caller in here from Virginia.
Yeah, that's me, Gary. Sorry.
Oh, hey, Gary.
Hey, in this day and age, you keep the phone number you got when you got it 30 years ago. So I'm actually sitting in New Orleans, but yeah, I got a Virginia number too.
Very good. Very good. All right. Well,
listen, I don't mean to be crude, but phone numbers like herpes. It stays with you forever.
Can we quote you on that?
I see you're already recording, so I'm down for posterity. This is on it, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, is Kelly back on the line?
Yes, sir.
Oh, very good. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to eRotary Coastal Club. It is Thursday, April 5th, 2018, and we're just so thankful to have everybody on the line with us today. Let me go ahead and do our Rotary traditions. First, we'll start with the prayer pledge and four-way test. Lord, we just thank you for this day. Thank you for the beautiful weather we're having here in the Deep South, and allow this weather we're having recharge those who need it, to nourish the plants, and may the rains that are coming over the next few days water, and may they produce a bountiful harvest for the farmers that feed us every day. And looking forward to the rest of the week in your presence. Pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. We live in America, and we are an American club. If you were a club outside of America, I don't think you'd be saying the Pledge of Allegiance, but we say the Pledge of Allegiance at eRotary Coastal Club. And so I will say it now. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Very good. Thank you, Charles. And next we have the four-way test. These are the the core values of Rotary International that it's called the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. We do this both while in Rotary and in Rotary service projects and interactions with Rotarians, but also in our everyday life. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill, better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? That's the Rotary four-way test, and it's one that we strive to meet every day here at eRotary Coastal Club. And so with that's kind of the Rotary general information. Let me give you some club information very quickly, and then we'll turn the microphone over to Stan, and he'll introduce our speaker today. But we have started the new Rotarian of the Day series, and Stan is up this week, and then we have Nanette Dautrive next week. We're going to be having back-to-back meetings, which is unusual for us. Normally we have a meeting every 2 weeks, so this is our make-up meeting for the meeting we should have had Thursday before Easter. And so we've just backed it up a week, and the next regularly scheduled meeting is next Thursday with Nanette as our Rotarian of the Day. And the following week is going to be the district conference in Lafayette, and we're going to be having Mark Shirley, who's going to be there at the conference with us, and he's going to describe for us the Rotary marshgrass planting project that's coming up just south of Abbeville, being sponsored by the Abbeville Rotary Club, which will be occurring on the Saturday, the 28th of April. And so Mark will be here, actually will be down with us at the district conference, and so we'll do a live remote from there at noon on Thursday. And then the following week, we'll be back into our Rotarian of the Day. So I guess we're going to have a full month of just back-to-back meetings, which is totally unusual for us. But we'll go with the flow, and and we'll make it exciting and fun all the way around. The marsh grass planting project, let me also briefly touch on that. I emailed the information that Mark emailed to me on Monday afternoon. They're going to be having 3 boat launchings starting at, I think, 8:30, 9:30, and 10:30 at a port location south of Abbeville. And they're going to plant marsh grass transplanted from one location from a nursery area. He calls it a nursery area. I think it's just marsh grass growing. And they're going to take it from one area and transplant it 2 miles. And we're going to revegetate a wetland area that has been diminished. And so we're going to replant some marsh grass there in the shape of the rotary wheel, which Mark tells us that after 2 years will be visible from space. So it'll be kind of fun. Yeah, I've got a boat. I recruited my father-in-law to bring his. He's got a frogging boat, shallow draft with one of those surface drive motors on it. So I'm going to go down with him. If someone would like to join us, I'd love to have you come with us. And if you got a boat, come on down south of Abbeville. I'd love to have you. We're also going to start taking attendance this week, which is something we've never done. Just so that we can have we're supposed to, as Rotarians, be taking attendance, and so we're finally going to get around to doing that. And Charles and I and Tyler have all indicated and I guess agreed one to another. We're going to call all of our members to find out where they are involved in their membership, what they would like to become involved with in an active way in our club, so that we can continue to spread the word about eRotary Coastal and join with other Rotary clubs in our geographic areas on service projects and become known for not just our great speakers that we have, but for our membership and the service that we provide to our coastal communities. And with that, that's the general announcements for eRotary Coastal Club. And so, Stan, for now, I'm going to turn it over to you and take it away, and you can introduce Kelly for us.
Okay, well, thanks very much. Everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Well, it's my privilege to introduce Kelly Heber-Dunning. She is, first and foremost, and I'm going to just, Kelly, use this word, so just take it with a grain of salt. She is a rabid Gator fan.
Go Gators!
And we have had some interesting discussions, especially after losses. So, but she is from raised in South Florida, Boynton Beach, Delray area, and went to a high school that's just down the road from me, and then she went to the University of Florida and got a degree in political science, wasn't it, Kelly?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, and then went to Oxford and did her master's dissertation on the Everglades. Oxford, Everglades, doesn't make any sense, but go with it. And then she came back to the United States and finished in May of 2017 her PhD at MIT and did a lot of work at Woods Hole. I
just want to say the Georgia Tech of the North.
The Georgia Tech of the North. So
there's a long story. There's a long story there, but don't let me hold you up.
All right. Well, so anyway, then she went to got a job in London and worked for the Rainforest Foundation. Did work in the Congo. And but interestingly, on her, I've seen this presentation, and I know you're not going to do this one, Kelly, but her PhD work was done in Indonesia, a lot of it, and Indonesia or the Philippines? Indonesia, right?
It was Indonesia and Malaysia, but mostly Indonesia, like you said.
Yeah, and so here's something that, Kelly, I wish you'd just mention briefly, because this is really important for the Gulf Coast, I think, of what your dissertation was on, and that is that what Kelly studied was if you have sea level rise and climate change have a big effect on coastal areas, what would happen to communities that were dependent on reef fishing in order to make subsistence? And so how is it that they could band together and collaborate and figure out how to overcome something if sea level rise crashed how they make a living? Is that kind of it, Kelly?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So if you have coastal communities that, especially like those that are small communities, and I think, Charles, you live in one of those small communities that have an effect, that are affected. How in the world would you do that? So that, I think, could be very useful from some of the things that Kelly worked on to make application in the United States in coastal areas. So anyway, she now has the job of working for the University of Texas in their coastal program and their coastal training program. So I've talked too much. So Kelly, why don't you tell us what's going on?
Thank you so much, Stan. That was a really kind introduction. I really appreciate that. I'm speaking to y'all today from Port Aransas, Texas. Right now, I believe it was Philip maybe who mentioned earlier that my internet was down. This is actually the eye wall of Hurricane Harvey passed right over the University of Texas campus out here. So even 6 months out, Harvey hit us in August. Even 6 months out, we're still in rebuilding mode. So our internet and phones are down all the time. I'm still in a temporary office. We have mold problems every other week. We have to keep the AC set to 65 because the mold grows back. All the drywall's been taken out so you can see everybody's feet in their offices. We are actually not in our permanent offices right now. We're in sort of like the museum on campus. So I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of life-size replicas of endangered whooping cranes because my office is effectively in a museum. So until they get that office built back up for us, I am an employee of the University of Texas at Austin, but I'm not based in Austin. Our facilities are actually down here in Port Aransas because obviously it's a marine science program and we need to be by the coast. However, the University of Texas at Austin, and this is interesting in terms of rebuilding and recovery and resilience to storms, has 11 different insurance companies. So a big part of the reason why everything is still so smashed up here and it's taking us a really long time to rebuild is because so much finger pointing and bureaucracy and feet dragging and delay has occurred that we are really sort of struggling. But this isn't just unique to the University of Texas at Austin. This is everybody in the Port Aransas and Rockport. Rockport is the city just to the northeast of us. The Port Aransas and Rockport area, where people who live here are having a huge problem getting insurance companies to pay out because of all the finger pointing and bureaucracy and, no, your company owes for wind damage, no, your company owes for rain damage and that sort of thing. So basically everybody who I know down here was displaced from Harvey if they lived in Port Aransas or in Rockport. Except for a few people here and there, but by and large, everyone I know had to move because of water damage to their property or wind damage to their property. So even 6 months out, it's still pretty rough, but we're making a recovery. Like I said earlier, my internet is down today and our phones have been down for a while, but slowly things are getting back to normal. They just started on the roof of our office. In the NOAA building, so we should be back there within a couple months. But so that's to hopefully paint a picture to you guys as to why before when I was on the phone with you, I kept saying, oh, hold on, because we always have construction workers coming in and out, and they're working on the internet this week and stuff like that. So it's always an adventure here. But thank you for your patience and for bearing with me, and thank you for the kind introduction, Stan. Today, I'm going to talk to you guys about coastal resilience in the state of Texas. And who is it who's clicking through my slides again? Who is it?
Your humble servant, Charles.
Oh, Charles. Okay, Charles, if you wouldn't mind going on to the next slide. And before I continue, I want to talk a little bit about the Mission Aransas National Estuarine Research Reserve, which is where I work. It's sort of confusing. I am a University of Texas employee, but I am also, my job is sort of nested on the Mission Aransas National Estuarine Research Reserve. We use the acronym to shorten up that a little bit. We call it the Mission Aransas NER, or just the Mission Aransas Reserve for short. But all over the United States, there are 29 National Estuarine Research Reserves, NERs. And these are basically estuaries that are considered to be ecologically, socially, economically very, very important to their surrounding communities and to the country as a whole. And, you know, based on where you are, I know that people are all over the Gulf on this call. Based on where you are, if you've never heard of the NER system before, you can go and have a look at your local NER and you can set up a visit and go and check it out. But the Mission Aransas NER is really cool because it includes the Aransas National Wildlife Refuge, which is one of the only places where you can see migratory whooping cranes, which are highly endangered, and there's only about 350 of them left in the world. And we were just out there doing field work last week, and I got to see about 10 whooping cranes. And as an avid birder, that was just one of the best days of my life. So, you know, check out our website. It's missionaransas.org. And I encourage you to check out the nearest NER to where you are because they offer a lot of public services and outreach, like courses or opportunities for children, opportunities for senior citizens, opportunities for decision makers. So if you work in a government office or you know someone who does and they want to get trained on something like the use of GIS, like often your local NER, you can find those types of training there. And through my role at the Coastal Training Program, running this program, this is the sort of stuff that I do. And I'll talk about that more informally at the end. But I'm going to get into the talk now. So we should be on the slide that says resilience at the header. It's slide 2. Yes. So coastal resilience, that's really the ability of a community to bounce back after hazardous events. I mean, I sort of gave you a picture at the beginning of this talk about what it's taken to allow us as the University of Texas to bounce back post-Harvey. And this is the NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration definition of resilience. But I would say that it doesn't just pertain to human communities, it also pertains to ecological communities as well. So in my background, which Stan so kindly outlined for me, I look at the links between social and ecological systems. And the jargon in the academic world for that is socio-ecological systems. So for example, whenever a commercial fishery collapses, what are the impacts to communities that they feel when that commercial fishery collapses? So the dynamics between socio-ecological systems, whether those are fisheries or wetlands or coastal ecosystems that are impacted by severe weather events, those are the sorts of things that I'm interested in. And this is sort of the modus operandi now for most government agencies who deal with natural resource management. We're no longer looking to react to things like invasive species or extreme weather. What we're looking to do is to increase resilience so that we're not responding long after the fact, and instead we're prepared for risks and hazards, and we're able to bounce back much quicker. Here in Port Aransas and in the city of Rockport, one of our most important economic events every year is spring break. This is known as the Texas Riviera. So people come down here for their spring break, which was about 3 weeks ago. And basically every shop and restaurant in Port Aransas, this is their big moneymaker every year, these 2 weeks where the spring breakers come in. And they were all sort of like racing to open up before the crowds came down and people were coming down and finally giving a much needed cash injection to the area. So, you know, some shops just couldn't swing it. Like there's a shop right up the road from me that sells live bait, and I went in there the Saturday before spring break to get some live shrimp to go fishing. And he was like, we just didn't cut it in time. We just couldn't make it in time. And, you start thinking about what goes into that inability to recover in time for the community's most important economic event. And a lot of that is, was your shop elevated up off the ground according to FEMA standards, or was it grandfathered in and just sat right on the ground and had the storm surge come through? And then whenever you're rebuilding for next time, are you going to elevate it up to where it should be, or are you going to instead opt to elevate it more? And I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but just all these different decisions that local business that local business leaders have to make in order to sort of not just recover from this most recent storm that we've had, but also be able to bounce back quicker after the next one. And the next one's coming. So, Charles, if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide, please. So coastal resilience is important everywhere because all communities face different types of hazards, whether they live on the coast or not. So you see the fires in California or droughts and things like that. But coastal areas especially have a lot of thinking to do about this concept of resilience, because we are the places that get hit with hurricanes. We are the places where everybody wants to move to because everybody wants to live by the beach. And we are the places that have to sort of plan and adapt for these types of events, because as sea surface temperatures increase through time, you're going to see more powerful storms. And whenever you live in an area like Harvey was the first storm in this part of Texas to this magnitude of power that they had seen in about 30 years. So you also have issues with people growing complacent or just completely unaware of the power of a Category 4 storm like Harvey. So, I talk informally to friends and colleagues around here all the time, and what they were saying was, as we were watching the news waiting for Harvey to hit, up until 2 or 3 days before, they were saying, oh, don't worry, it's just a tropical storm, it's fine. And then about 2 days before, they were like, actually, it's a Category 4, and actually you have to evacuate. And by then, everybody had been listening to the news and thinking like, oh, it's not that big deal. It's not that big of a deal. Who cares? And then whenever they started to say, actually, it's a huge deal, like the eye wall may very well pass over Corpus Christi, and all the water in the bay will just slosh out like a bathtub. If you sort of take both ends of a bathtub, an imaginary bathtub, and slosh it around, all that will just go right into the city where everyone lives and stuff like that, because nobody really knew where the eye wall was going to make landfall, but people started to get serious about it. But it was really close to right before it hit landfall, so people were evacuating. There were huge issues with fuel supply and things like that, much like we see where I grew up in South Florida, where everybody evacuates all at once and traffic is unbelievable and gas just isn't there. So these types of things make coastal resilience especially important because of, we do have some of the most advanced storm warning systems in the world in the United States. However, are people going to believe them? Are people going to listen to them? Are people going to listen to them if they've been told the week in advance that they don't have anything to worry about? Or will they do like what we do in South Florida? And Stan, you've probably done this before with your family like I've done with mine. We have a hurricane party. You just get a bunch of beer in the cooler and you just wait it out, which isn't necessarily the wisest choice, but that's what we did as kids. And I can remember that going as far back to Andrew, my parents having hurricane parties. So these are very real things, and it's so much more complicated than just knowing when the hurricane is coming. It's about knowing how people's behavior will respond to the storm. If you don't mind clicking over to the next slide, please, Charles.
Okay.
Thank you. So the next topic that I want to talk a little bit about is resilience and recovery. Like I said before, every community is going to face hazards, whether it's inland or on the coast. The most important thing about resilience, for the sake of our conversation that we're having today, it's our ability to prevent a one-off event like a Category 4 hurricane that hits in August of 2017 from turning into a multi-year disaster. And, you know, like I said, things are coming back here very slowly. But I'm going to go through the specific numbers later on in the talk. But if you just drive around the street here in Port Aransas, you know, if you're looking to go and get dinner after work or something like that, you'll notice that so many of the restaurants are still closed, and it's about to be the summer tourism season. And that economic depression that comes from all these businesses remaining closed for so long has a huge impact on you know, the workforce, on the local economy, on the community, because what you also see, because everything is closed and people have lost their jobs, you see people moving out and moving over to Houston or moving up to San Antonio. So you see a lot of movement. You see a lot of people without their jobs anymore. So, and this is the very definition of a community-wide disaster, when people who have been here a long time just pick up and go. And most communities do have emergency management systems in place. So first responders, hospitals, things like that. But many, many, many communities, especially in coastal areas, have not yet worked out the emergency management systems equivalent for what long-term recovery looks like. And that's surprising, because we live in a relatively well-off country where you think, like, you know, hey, you know, if a storm hits, we're going to get our people back on their feet pretty soon. But you see so many commercials on TV for lawyers advertising their services for people who have yet to have a single payout from FEMA or from their insurance company or anything like that. People are still really struggling with this sort of stuff. And, you know, the systems aren't really in place here to engage the community in long-term recovery, whether that community member is a business owner or an employee of a business or a homeowner or a second homeowner. There's all these different considerations that come into play whenever you're planning these types of systems. And that's sort of what I work on here as the Coastal Training Program Coordinator, is designing these systems in conjunction with local policymakers to make sure that they're in place for the next one. And of course, hurricanes aren't planned. I got lucky or unlucky to come here right after Harvey, when this is at the forefront of everyone's thinking. So the people, I'm primarily here to engage decision makers on planning for resilience and that sort of thing. But because of the most recent impacts of Hurricane Harvey, and how you can literally walk outside your front door and see debris piles still in the streets, you know, 15-foot high debris piles. Whenever I go and walk my friend's dog, every third house has a huge debris pile in front of it, restaurants boarded up, shops boarded up, that sort of stuff. The fact that people can see it every day means that it's a really amazing opportunity for people like us, because people are thinking about it and people are willing to do something about it. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please, Charles.
Okay.
So I have some info for you guys in here about Hurricane Harvey. I'm sure that, you know, since I heard that some people are over in Louisiana and stuff like that, that most people are familiar with the impacts. But even as I was preparing these slides, some of this stuff surprised me. You know, maybe I had read it in the past and forgot about it, but I just wanted to sort of highlight some stuff about Harvey that maybe you had not seen before, or maybe you had forgotten. Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Katrina are tied. They're actually the most expensive hurricanes on record. $125 billion in damage, primarily from flooding, and primarily in Houston. And Houston is one of the biggest and most densely populated areas in the United States. So that is a really heavy hitter in terms of damage. But if you talk to people around here in Port Aransas and Rockport, pretty much everyone I know has had some type of flooding-related damage to the drywall in their property. And that's what most of our damage is here at the University of Texas facilities, actually, is all this flooding damage. And something interesting is we have a $6 million research pier where we collect all of the estuary data for the NER, for the Mission Aransas NER, water quality currents, pretty much everything that you can think of, we collect that off that pier. Well, it actually survived Hurricane Harvey. The director of the reserve came a couple days later and was like, yes, it's still here. And an oil tanker slipped off its rigging in Aransas Pass and was just kind of banging around the main channel to get into Corpus Christi Bay off its moorings, smashed into our pier and completely destroyed our $6 million research pier. So While most of the damage was flooding, you had a lot of the damage also done by the fact that, like, most people were evacuated, so things just kind of went haywire in the wake of the storm as well. If you don't mind changing over to the next slide, please.
Okay.
So Harvey was the first major hurricane to make landfall in the U.S. since Wilma in 2005. And when I say major, I mean like greater than a Category 3. It ended a record 12-year span where no hurricanes have made landfall of Category 4 intensity. So like I was saying earlier, resilience is a really difficult concept to promote, this type of long-term thinking. Like, what will we do when a one-off event becomes a long-term disaster in the community? Well, that's a really difficult type of thinking because it's expensive and it takes a lot of planning and it takes a lot of personnel and dedication and time. It's a really difficult line of thinking to get people to follow whenever you haven't had something like that happen to you in 12 years. So over a 4-day period here in Texas, a lot of areas around here and in Houston got over 40 inches of rain, and that was just unprecedented flooding here and in Texas as well. And I was just out today with a bunch of volunteers out on our dunescape. We have some dunes that are about 25 feet up, and you have to kind of do for me, it's kind of a bit of a hike. I'm getting older, but we got up to the top, and there was a rack up there, sort of dry grass and plant matter that had washed up there from the Harvey storm surge. And some of our volunteers were like, "Is this from Harvey? We're so high up." And I was like, "Yes, this is from Harvey. Like, this is how high the water's got at the the peak of the storm surge." So it's actually shocking, the reach of the storm surge and the flooding and that type of stuff. The next slide, please.
Okay.
So Harvey was actually the wettest hurricane on record in the United States. And the flooding affected hundreds of thousands of homes. And in Texas and across the wider Gulf, 30,000 people were displaced from their homes and 17,000 people had to be rescued. Next slide, please.
Okay.
In the state of Texas and here in Port Aransas and Rockport, and we're on a barrier island out here. It's called Mustang Island. Whenever you drive south on Mustang Island, eventually you hit what's called the Padre Island National Seashore, which is sort of like the National Park Service equivalent of a national park, like on a seashore. So this barrier island and the rest of Texas that got hit by Harvey here in the state, 336,000 people without electricity, tens of thousands requiring rescue, around 100 people died. So here in Port Aransas, actually, the power was out for many, many, many days. Same thing in Rockport. A lot of people didn't have power for weeks after the storm, and they came and they strung up the lines again post-storm. But because of how quickly that had to be done, the power goes in and out with some regularity whenever we have high winds. I live on the barrier island, so whenever we have high winds, you can expect the power will go out for a couple hours or so. So, things are still 6 months later, not 100% back to normal. So I probably, the next slide, please. I probably should have put this slide up at the very beginning of my talk, so I apologize for that. This is just, I've been talking about all these places. For those of you that don't know, I've marked Port Aransas on the map of Texas on the left, and I've marked Port Aransas on the map of Texas, or on the map of the Corpus Christi area on the right. If you look at the bay of Corpus, you can see that it's sort of that semicircle shape, and you have that bridge going across from downtown Corpus into Portland. Well, the big fear for Harvey's eye making eye fall was you have what's called a slosh effect in a basin where all that water sort of moves through like a tidal wave, and all the big financial buildings and stuff like that would be sort of right at a point that would receive all that slosh. But when Harvey's eye wall actually passed over, it passed over the part of this map where you can see like Best Western, and then it moved westwards over by Aransas Pass, and if you look a little bit north up to Rockport. So these are the places that got really, really heavily hit, both Port Aransas, Aransas Pass, and Rockport. On a side note, if you look directly northeast of where Port Aransas is marked on the map on the right, San Jose Island is the largest undeveloped barrier island in the United States. I was just out there this past week. We were doing some field work on an island in the Aransas National Wildlife called Matagorda, and despite the fact that San Jose Island is completely uninhabited and undeveloped, we did about a mile walk because the Mission Aransas NER runs surveys out there. We did a mile walk, and you just saw so much marine plastic waste. It was incredible. Could not believe it. But that's just a side note. And that's sort of tied into resilience because when you have your coastal barrier system choked with plastic marine debris, you don't have the grasses growing the way they should. You don't have migratory birds acting the way they should because they'll ingest some of this plastic and die. So you just weaken these systems that, you know, once ecosystems are stronger, they'll be more resilient to bigger shocks like extreme storms like we saw with Harvey. So it's just a bit of a side note there. The next slide, please.
Okay.
Thank you. So I want to go through some specific damage totals here in Port Aransas so you can get a sense of what we're dealing with in our rebuild. Like I said, it made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane, and it inflicted tremendous damage across the county that you can still see to this day. I was just driving up to Rockport the other day for a meeting, and along the highway, on the interior of the highway, you have these mounds of debris that are probably 60 feet at their highest peak. They just look absolutely huge, like something out of a dystopian sci-fi movie, and there are just dozens of them all through the drive out to Rockport, just piled up in the middle of the highway, waiting to be taken out and removed. Wind gusts in Port Aransas were observed up to 132 miles an hour. Entire blocks of housing in Rockport were leveled. The county courthouse was taken out. This is kind of one of the most famous things that happened during the storm. A big cargo trailer just kind of landed right in the middle of the courthouse out in Rockport. Next slide, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Like I was saying before, nearly every single structure that exists here in Port Aransas suffered some type of damage, mostly flooding. By the afternoon of August 26th, that's the day after, more than 20 inches of rain had fallen on Corpus Christi. All of Victoria, Texas was left without water, and most had no power. That's a pretty significant urban area to be left with like absolutely no water and power. The devastation of this storm is just absolutely appalling. It's unreal. Next slide, please.
Okay.
And, you know, where you have a lot of damage like this, we often talk in terms of the economic impacts of Harvey. So where I work in Port Aransas, or Port A, we make most of our money here off of tourism. So like I said, spring break is basically our most important time of the year where local business owners make money. The Chamber of Commerce spends so much of their manpower working to pull off spring break every year because the population of Port A just absolutely swells to be multiple times over more than it is on a day-to-day basis outside of spring break. So 6 months after the storm, only 23% of hotel rooms were open for booking. And then 10 months after, it's projected to be 90%, but we'll see. That seems a little high to me. And then only half the city's shops and restaurants are open at this point. So, you know, again, like people think, you know, we live in the United States. We're a wealthy country. We have rule of law. We have agencies that work on this stuff. We don't think, you know, 6 or 10 months out that you can have a small town like this that has just yet to make the progress towards normalcy that you would expect to see in the United States. But this is like a very real problem on the ground. And a lot of the lessons that we learned after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans can be applied very closely to what's going on a smaller scale here in Port Aransas and Rockport. Next slide.
Okay.
So in terms of the wider economy, the oil refinery industry was really impacted by the storm. Oil and gas production was affected all over the Gulf of Mexico and into inland Texas. A lot of oil refineries had to close ahead of Harvey. So the fuel shortage that you see in the lead up to storms, because everybody's putting gas in their cars and everybody's putting gas in their big tankers and stuff like that in industrial areas like this, that was made even worse by the fact that this is a big oil refinery area. So the fact that those refineries had to close in the lead up to Hurricane Harvey made recovery in the long term much more difficult. And more than 20% of oil refining capacity was affected by the storm. Next slide, please.
Okay.
So before Hurricane Harvey, Port Aransas had 3,500 residents, and right now about 2,000 people are living here. Officials are hopeful that the population by summer will increase back up to 3,200 people, but they're not exactly sure how that's going to happen. I could speak on a personal level of what it's like to find housing in Port Aransas, because when I first moved here to take this job in late January, usually, whenever you move to an area, you pull up a website like Craigslist or Zillow, and you look for a rental unit, and there's a couple options, especially in small towns like this. But here in Port A, when I was looking in late January, there were actually 0 options to rent. So I have to live 25 minutes south in North Padre because the housing stock is just so oversaturated by people who were displaced from their homes from the storm. But in addition to that, the area is just absolutely congested with contractors from all over the state of Texas who have come down here to aid in the rebuilding efforts, and those contractors all need somewhere to stay as well. So often, if you live and work in town, you're directly competing in an already oversaturated housing market by people who have been displaced with people who are new to the area and temporary residents because they've come in to do contracting work. So next slide, please.
Okay.
So Port Aransas is rebuilding, like I said, it's little by little. The schools came back a couple months after the storm. There's a 15-year-old boy who volunteers at our wildlife rehabilitation facility here who was telling me that he had to go to school in San Antonio for 3 months, and then by the 4th month he was able to come back down and go back to his high school. Like I mentioned the power lines before. The power lines were fully restored. There are still tons of problems, like I mentioned, with people sorting out insurance payments and things like that. And despite the fact that contractors have come in from all over the state of Texas, and there are so many of them here, there's still actually a documented shortage of contractors. So things that need repairs and rebuilds are just dealing with the fact that there just aren't enough contractors to take all of the available work. Next slide, please.
Okay.
So what is Port Aransas doing by way of resilience? This whole talk, I want to kind of bring it back to this idea of resilience. We're not just reacting to Harvey, but we're also planning with more of an eye to the long term, where we want to be able to absorb shocks and rebound from them in a timely manner to where, next time we get hit with a Category 4, Category 3, whatever it may be, maybe it won't take 6 months to come back, or it won't take a year to come back. So what is Port Aransas doing by way of resilience? Well, this is part of my role here at the University of Texas Marine Science Institute, is to provide this type of capacity building and training to people in the city of Port Aransas, planners who work for cities, state agencies, local agencies. This is a service that is offered through the Mission Aransas NER, and basically we are here to build capacity around this idea of increasing resilience and increasing resilient thinking. So after Hurricane Harvey, city leaders in Port Aransas started to really reflect on the lessons that they had learned from the storm, and one of the biggest lessons that people have learned here is the need to change building regulations. City leaders are considering right now imposing much tougher elevation requirements on new built homes to lessen the impacts of floods, for example. So, you can go into a planner's office and you can see, pardon me, the floodplain map for the local area, and you'll see the elevation required for new build homes, whether it's 6 feet above mean sea level, 12 feet above mean sea level, whatever it may be. They're looking right now in Port Aransas of going by those maps or actually requiring the elevation of new build homes to be greater than what the map suggests, because they've seen directly how long it takes to recover from a shock like Harvey, how it drains local facilities and resources in emergency management and response. So they're making plans in the long term, which may cost more in the short term, but may actually help people in the long run. Pardon me. Can we have the next slide, please?
Okay.
Thank you. So you can't really go to private property owners and sort of impose these things on them, but like what they're looking to do is apply these to buildings that sort of have that greater public significance. So like the police department, the courthouse, facilities where city employees work, these sorts of things. So for example, the City Hall of Port Aransas, FEMA regulations require that the building should be 8 feet above mean sea level. But city staff is currently looking at requiring all city property to be 12 feet above mean sea level. So this is 4 feet higher than what FEMA requires. So they're sort of looking at going above and beyond what these federal agencies are requiring them to build to, in order to sort of increase their ability to recover from a shock like Harvey in the future. And then the last slide, I wanted to sort of end, before I tell you a little bit about the stuff that I'm planning on doing with my role here as the Coastal Training Program Coordinator, I wanted to end with some quotes from the mayor of Port Aransas, Mayor Bouillon. And the quote says, "You had an 11-foot wall of water wash over the island. What we have to do as a city is to raise the elevation of all of our buildings to at least 12 feet. I think we'll be pretty safe. We won't suffer as much damage." So to me, as somebody who is trying to engage policymakers, elected officials, decision makers, people like that, as somebody who's looking to engage those types of people on, not necessarily making the cheapest decision now to recover quickly, because everybody wants everything fixed right now. People are really tired of living in post-recovery Port Aransas. So while making these snap decisions that cost less money and rebuilding more quickly, what may be best is to think more in the long term, spend a little bit more money, build a little bit higher, take a little bit longer to recover, so that in the future we won't need to repeat the same mistakes of this time around. So like I said earlier in my talk, I'm the Coastal Training Program Coordinator here at the Mission Aransas NER, and what I offer are a bunch of capacity building workshops to primarily to decision makers, but also to people who are interested in natural resource management along the Gulf Coast, primarily here in Texas. And the biggest event that I wanted to mention while I'm on the phone with you that we are gearing up towards, and I'm going to send this information along to Charles to distribute to the club. This will be April 30th to May 1st. We're holding a Community of Practice annual meeting for climate and resilience in the Gulf. This is something that I am helping to plan along with Texas Sea Grant and the Hart Research Institute, which the Hart Research Institute is a very well-funded research institute that was made basically in the wake of the BP Deepwater Horizon spill, and it was endowed by someone who saw the impacts of Deepwater Horizon and wanted to create sort of like a top-notch center for Gulf research. So we work really, really closely with Hart here at UTMSI. We work closely with Texas Sea Grant, and we're all sort of coming together with a lot of local officials like Nueces County Parks and the City of Rockport to put on this Community of Practice annual meeting on April 30th and May 1st, where we're going to have several panels of people from here in Port A, some people from Monroe County in Florida, and what they're going to be talking about is how they recovered, but also resilience. So not just how they recovered after Irma and after Harvey, but what they're doing more so by way of long-term thinking and resilience planning. So that's coming up on April 30th and May 1st. I have another event coming up here on May 10th. It's going to be at the Hart Research Institute at Texas A&M Corpus Christi, but it's a University of Texas marine science event. We just have to hold it over there because, like I said earlier, our facilities have been completely smashed by Harvey. But it's a workshop that we're putting on the use of remote sensing data for coastal planning and decision making in the context of the Gulf of Mexico. So it's a NASA funded workshop. It's being put on by the Balmoral Group, which is an environmental consulting firm based out of Winter Park, Florida, and they've already given workshops like this in Louisiana, but in Alabama. But what we do here as the Coastal Training Program at the University of Texas, Austin, Marine Science, is to bring people like this to our area in order to build the capacity of local decision makers, agencies, city personnel, planners, people like that. So we're going to train them up on how to use remote sensing data to make decisions and make calls on planning using coastal ecosystem data like wetlands data, dunes data, things like that. So those are probably the two most important events, and that gives you kind of like a good taste of what we do over here at the Coastal Training Program. So with that, I think I'm going to wrap up and thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelly. This is Philip. Great presentation.
Thank you.
I was always wondering whatever happened to Rockport and I guess the area that you're in, because most of the attention was on Houston where all this flooding was going. And I was going, but the Category 4 hurricane had a direct hit on a coastal community. Can we hear anything about what happened there? And 6 months later, with it just still being piles of rubble, it is a difficult, even to imagine. It's just difficult for me to even imagine. And then the future of the community, to have to build your community centers, your public buildings 12 feet off the ground. Of course, you'd put a garage or something underneath it, I guess, the way it'd be designed. But still, that is a huge undertaking. Thank you for that presentation on that area and what you're doing locally to try to recover from that. I do want to say that while you were speaking, I went to the NER website for your mission estuary, and it's huge. I mean, you're protecting over 186,000 acres.
That's right.
Look on the map.
Right.
It's not just a little small estuary. This is a huge area. That's quite a habitat that you're responsible for. So we want to thank you for making your presentation, and love to hear in the future maybe have you speak on that estuary work that you're actually doing there as well, because that's a massive and the recovery of that after a storm like this. They say the wildfires are great for the forest because it really helps them with new growth. I'd be interested in an estuary environment of a storm of that magnitude, what would happen as well. So thank you for the presentation. I'll open it for others to make a comment before we go.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
This is Stan. There is a effort that we became involved with a few months ago that with Monroe County and the Keys, and there is the effort that was down there was really very fragmented, and finally the mayor of Monroe County decided that they were going to kind of get everything under one banner. and they came up with an organization called Keys Strong, STRONG, and or hashtag Keys Strong. You can see all about it. And one of the things that they did was they put in place a network of communication formats that included all the radio stations in the Keys and a whole bunch of other ways in which they began saying, we're not really coordinated for a disaster like Irma at all. Just over the past few months, they've hired a guy by the name of, this is kind of a weird one, but his name is Pachi, and it's spelled Patxi, and it's pronounced like bocce ball, except it's Pachi, and Pastor, Pastor. And you can go to keystrong.org or just Pachi Pastor and see how they're beginning to coordinate in a effort that will actually, it is the best resilience plan I've seen to date. So I'll send you the information, Kelly, on that, and everybody else.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Stan. That would be such a huge resource for me. I really do appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Is there anyone else have any questions for Kelly? All right. Well, Kelly, that sounds like we're done. We appreciate your time today. As Charles had indicated earlier, your presentation will be archived and will be available for viewing probably on our website next week.
Awesome.
We thank you for your presentation today. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. When you said you just took the job in January, I'm going, oh my gosh, and you moved into this area.
Well, being a South Floridian, hurricanes don't scare me. So.
yeah. Well, I'm thinking about just like you were saying that where are you going to find a place to live and get an apartment? Where are you going to eat? Where's your grocery store? I mean, there's all kinds of things that you've been dealing with since January. So, on behalf of the others, members of our club and citizens of the United States, thank you for going to an area that is in great need of persons of your qualifications and abilities to help them recover and to help the estuarine environment that you're working with. So we appreciate your time today. And again, we invite you to join us on this great adventure we call eRotary Coastal Club and participate with us. You're more than welcome to dial in at any time and join our meetings. But if you'd like to be a member of our club, we'd love to have you join us.
Yeah, I would love to get more information on that. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Very good. I'll follow that up with an email to you. If that's it, if we have nothing else, anyone have anything else before we go? All right. Well, with that, we will sign off for today. Thank you, everybody. Have yourselves a great weekend, and be safe out there. And we will be back again next week with Nanette Treves as our Rotarian of the Week. Thank you, Stan, for your help this week, and we'll see you next week.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.